one day in consulting is like a week working in industry because you get experience in so many different areas. And oftentimes, the projects you're working on are more complex projects that, that's the reason you were brought in. It's hard and they didn't know how to do it. So you got to figure it out. And, that's fun, but it can also be stressful. But I think it's a great way to learn.
Hey nerds, Monica here. Welcome to the Data Podcast for Nerds, where we get to talk to amazing professionals and ask them all about how they're using data to solve the world's problems. We're sharing all the tips, tricks, and nerdy fun bits to make you the best data professional you can be. Today with us, we're bringing on Chris Moshier. How are you doing today, Chris?
I'm awesome. How are you, Monica? Happy 2025.
Happy 2025! It's officially the new year. So excited for a fresh new start and see all of what this year has to bring.
It's going to be a good year.
It is. I agree. So we typically start off our episodes by asking people about their origin stories. So if you could please tell us about how you got into data.
Yeah, you bet. So I made my first spreadsheet when I was 15 years old. I actually started at Waterford Township, the little city that I live in. My mom saw a job posting for a co-op student, and they wanted someone who knew how to do drafting because they wanted someone to draw zoning maps. So I started doing that, but I found they had one computer in the office. Like, you actually had to go sign and register time at the computer. So I did. And I started building some spreadsheets and tracking different things. And that launched me into kind of a data career in GIS, or Geographic Information Systems. So that's kind of where my data career started, was Excel and GIS.
That's awesome. That's a really fun area to kind of kickstart, is like with maps and stuff. So are you really good at navigating around town?
I think I am. My wife says I'm not, and she says I'm a terrible driver too. But I think I'm good at navigating. I love maps. You'll see there's a map behind me, and I think that kind of, it gave me a way where I look at data and I look for patterns. I look for the spatial side and the visualization side of data. It just gave me, I loved it. And what I found is a lot of the different analyses that I would do using data. I didn't realize it, but it was using things that people use in analytics now. I would have to go join two data sets, but I'm joining them spatially. I'm joining parcels to other data that's spatial. And I looked at the spatial relationships and how I joined related data, which I thought was really cool. I had to figure out workarounds. I was working on an old laptop or an old actually desktop machine. And I was trying to go process data sets that maybe had 1 million rows, which I thought was huge at that time. And it would take 4 or 5 hours to run. So I had to go figure out ways to kind of batch it out and do it in small pieces in order to actually make it so it didn't crash my computer.
Interesting. So I'm thinking when you're joining two of those spatial data sets, you're just joining on like lat long, or what else do you join on?
So you can join, traditional left and right joins and join based on a parcel number. But when you're doing a spatial join, I would go say, I have parcels and those are polygons, and I want to go find all the parcels that are within 300 feet of another parcel. So you do a buffer, and then you can go select, and it joins, like you said, based on the lat long. And I used a tool called Esri, which is ArcGIS, and that's where I kind of started. And now even tools like Tableau and Power BI and other BI tools have the spatial joining capability to even open that up and almost democratize GIS to non-GIS people.
Interesting. That's really neat.
Yeah, I am absolutely a map nerd.
Yeah. So what do you do now? Are you still in the GIS space?
I'm not. So I spent, 15 years of my career doing that. And then I came across a really cool opportunity with Plant Moran, which is where I am now. They were looking for someone who knew technology in the public sector. And my entire career had been in the public sector and doing technology. So I thought it sounded neat. So I joined Plant Moran in 2012. And I was helping cities and counties implement different technologies, but I still just had this passion and love for data. So I did that for a few years. And then in 2016, Plant Moran asked if I would launch our Analytics Center of Excellence. So that's kind of what formally brought me into this data role with an actual analytics and data title. I mean, I was 36 years old, and I'm just now kind of formally getting into data after having done it for a long time, which I think shows you have pivots and twists and turns in your career.
Absolutely. So what you're saying is that you've kind of always been that data nerd, but that really formal transition was when you were ahead of that center of excellence.
You bet. I mean, that's when I formally kind of had that title, and it was neat being, an analytics person in an accounting firm because everything that we did was spreadsheets. And so if you could do a spreadsheet better than someone else, all of a sudden you're a wizard. And then all of a sudden, when I went and learned Tableau, and I fell in love with Tableau, and maybe it was the visualization side of it. It was slicing, dicing data, finding patterns, but I fell in love with it, and I became really, really good at it. And I ended up running a few different engagements using Tableau that showed how we could use data as consultants and accountants in different ways to go find patterns and go find anomalies and go find internal control risks visually based on data sets that you wouldn't be able to process in Excel as easily.
Mm-hmm. And I know Tableau does map data as well. So how exactly is Tableau different than like the ArcGIS system?
Sure. So if you think about ArcGIS by Esri, I mean, it was built from the ground up. I mean, from I think the 80s to be focused on spatial data and GIS. Tableau was built up front to be a pivot table on steroids. And so they kind of expanded and added some of the spatial abilities. And by doing that, I think they actually made it really neat because you could then interact to make a dashboard that shows a map that has a pivot table or has a pie chart or a bar chart on the other side, and you can kind of interact with them together. So I think that was really cool about Tableau. But one of the kind of the shortcomings originally when I started learning Tableau in 2016 is you didn't really have the ability to add layers. So if you think about a map, a map might have an aerial photo, and then it might have parcel lines, and then it may have street names, and then it might have other data sets where you add all these layers on top of each other, and Tableau just didn't have that at the time.
So it seems that your favorite data projects would be these spatial projects. What would you say are maybe the most struggles that come with those types of projects?
So I love spatial data and I love maps. And with those, I think one of the biggest challenges is not too dissimilar from, any other data project. Bad data. I mean, at the end of the day, if you don't have good data, it doesn't matter if it's spatial data or not spatial, it's going to be a struggle. And so, that's what I did for a long time. And now, I mean, being in an accounting firm, I found I actually like looking for needles in the haystack. Some of my favorite projects from a data perspective are where there's some crazy problem no one's ever seen before, and they think there's a needle in the haystack that's going to solve it. And analytics is kind of like, I view it's like a metal detector. And so you go build a metal detector with some analytics rules to go find that needle in the haystack, and it ends up where it's not just one needle in the haystack, it's actually a bunch of them, and it takes some time to go find them.
Absolutely, absolutely. My thought is with working in an accounting firm, you probably would have to have some kind of metal detector to find such mistakes because, at least in my brain, accounting firms probably wouldn't have a lot of mistakes. They would still, of course, have mistakes, but there wouldn't be as many. So you have to use some kind of data analytics, more advanced approach to find them.
You bet. And oftentimes I'm working with clients to go look in their data to go figure out where there might be a mistake. And they hire us or they bring us in because they're struggling to kind of get their arms around it. I was working with one client, and they felt like their data wasn't right, and that it came down to millions of dollars that they were afraid might be misreported. And they were trying to go figure it out in all of their data, and ended up, I had to go bring in, I think it was all said and done, 20 or 30 million rows of financial transactions, and go join it and analyze it and slice it and dice it in different ways, using the metal detector to go figure out and find what the issue was. And when it was all said and done, we found it wasn't just one issue. There were dozens, and they were not just technology. There were people and process issues too, which is not surprising.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That leads to my next question. I was going to ask, are you seeing specific trends in the types of issues that you do find?
Yeah, I see a few. So I think, from a finance perspective, I'm seeing a lot of organizations are getting more technological. They're creating more data, which sounds terrific. But, sometimes I think in finance, it actually makes it more difficult, because you end up, organizations, especially in the middle market, have, many, many different systems with data. So if you're a finance person and you're trying to just do a simple thing like figure out your month-end close, you have to go look at your accruals, go look at your all of your adjustments you need to make, and your AR. In order to do that, if you need to go pull Excel files from 4 or 5 or 6 different systems and find out that there are different assumptions and bad data quality in it, and now you're trying to go integrate all of that together in Excel using VLOOKUPs, it makes it really, really difficult. And I see that trend even more, and it scares me, because when we talk about AI is only going to amplify that issue even more.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I could see, especially like when you're collecting data in different ways, you can do like some fat finger typing, or, some numbers, and that can definitely lead to inaccuracies, especially with month end close processes.
I mean, it's from fat fingered and typos, but I mean, it even gets down to very, very simple issues like process issues. Where an organization might not realize that they've got an ETL process that's moving data from this system to this system, and somewhere in that process, someone wrote a line of code to accommodate one issue where they might assume anytime you see this value to change it to another value because they had to go fix something. And all of a sudden that's buried in their ETL. And then no one ever even knows it's there. And all of a sudden those codes change, and it just turns into a nightmare.
Wow. What other aha moments have you had? Because that sounds very extreme. Like, that's something that you need to basically monitor on a periodic basis, like all of your ETL processes.
100%. I mean, and that it comes down to data governance, and actually knowing what data you have. There's a guy named Scott Taylor, huge data guy, and he calls himself the data whisperer. But he always says truth before meaning. So I'm giving him credit. He says truth before meaning, and I think that's important, because sometimes we try to look at data and just go figure out what it means without first figuring out, is the data right? Is the data telling the truth? So, I was working with, an insurance company, and they were looking at how much they were paying out in claims, over time. And they saw it was increasing, and they couldn't figure out why. They had some suspicions, but they were concerned that maybe there was something set up in their systems wrong, or maybe an ETL process was wrong. And so they asked to dig in and try to figure it out. And, what we ended up learning was actually really, really simple. Most of the data was right, but it came down to people. And in this case, people were going to the dentist more. And when they went to the dentist after the pandemic, they were getting more x-rays. And when they would get x-rays, sometimes the dentists were charging more for the x-rays. So, I mean, I'm making it really, really simple, but we had to go through thousands of lines of SQL code to go run a bunch of different tests to go find these different anomalies across millions of rows of data. And I think it's neat when you find those little aha moments buried in the data.
Absolutely. Very interesting. So, part of this podcast, we have what are called fun bits. And I think it would be interesting to kind of do a new take on the fun bits this year, at least for this episode.
You bet.
We're going to do a speed run. You gave
Okay.
me a list of what types of things you are a nerd specialist in. So I have some questions for you.
Uh-oh. All right. I did give a list, and I don't know if I'm a specialist in any of them, but I am a nerd about all of them.
Great. So you said that you are a pizza nerd. What is your favorite pizza?
Oh gosh, it has to be a margarita pizza because it's so simple, it's classic, and it has to be Caputo flour in a wood-fired oven. And I mean, that's just the way it has to be. But I'm a Detroit guy. Go Lions! And Detroit style pizza is not far behind. And on that, you just need pepperoni.
Okay, that's fair. I couldn't tell you what kinds of crusts are on pizzas other than thin crust and hand tossed.
So you've never had Detroit style pizza?
I don't think so. Is
Okay,
that
you've
deep
got to.
dish or is that
Yeah,
something different?
it's deep
Okay.
dish, and it's a very high hydration dough. It's normally like 80% water weight compared to the flour weight, and that's how you know I'm a
Oh,
nerd.
okay.
They use a steel pan, and they're steel pans that they actually used to use in the auto factories when they were making cars. And then you put the dough in there, you let it rise, and again, it gets all gooey because it's a really high hydration dough. And then you have to use Wisconsin brick cheese. So that's the kind of cheese you use for Detroit style pizza. So I don't know that I proved I'm a specialist, but I am a nerd.
The only thing I know about Wisconsin cheese is their cheese curds.
I do like cheese curds, especially
Okay.
from Culver's.
All right. Next question. You said that you're a running nerd. What
I
are
am.
your favorite running sneakers?
Oh, I only wear Sauconys. So
Okay.
I've got the same pair of shoes, and I've got I think seven pairs of the same shoes. They're different colors, different models, and I actually made a little dashboard in Tableau that I shared out on Tableau Public where I actually made the colors of each route that I ran match the pair of shoes that I was wearing. So I wear Saucony
Okay.
guides. They work. They're great shoes, and once you find a pair of shoes you like, stick with it.
Do they make you run faster or longer?
Um, I have found so I don't try to run fast. I'm old and I'm out of shape. So I just need something that makes sure my knees don't get sore. So these they allow me to run a little bit longer. When I started running, my knees would get sore after a mile and a half. And so now with these and practice and training, I actually finished my first marathon in October of this year. So thank you. It was a workout. I had to walk the last 5 miles because of my knee, but I signed up for my next marathon in Indianapolis this November. My
Okay.
goal this time is to finish it in 5 hours, and I'll probably wear the same pair of shoes.
Amazing. Next question. You said that you are a travel and foodie nerd. Where in the world has the best food?
Oh, where has the I'm going to have to say Italy. And it probably goes back to me being a pizza nerd. I've been to France. French food's fine. It's a little too foo-foo for me. But we went to Italy and went to we went to two restaurants. One, a restaurant in Rome, and it was called Sipasso, and it was a little wine bar. We just loved it. So we ended up eating dinner at there, I think 4 nights in a row. So on our last night, they said, we'll see you tomorrow. And we're like, no, we're going up to Florence. And so they actually gave us two glasses of, two wine glasses to take home that had their name etched in it, just as a little souvenir. And then in Florence, we found a little place that we just loved. The guy's name was Gino. And so we got a picture of Gino hanging on the wall of my living room right now because we ate there like 3 nights in a row and got to know him.
That's something I would do. If I find a place that I really liked, I'm just eating there for the rest of my
Yeah,
trip.
I have habits. Wherever I go, I eat dinner at one place, and it might be 4 or 5 nights in a row. But I think that's what's cool about food is like if they have good food, what I end up doing is I just enjoy the people.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Next question. You said that you are also a music nerd. Who is your favorite musician?
Oh, my favorite musician. It's going to vary depending on the mood I'm in. Right now, I like NF. So NF is a rapper. My son, who's now 19, got me onto NF a long time ago, and now that's who I like to listen to when I'm out for a run sometimes. But I say I'm a nerd because I've always found I like the weird music. I don't listen to the pop top 100 or whatever. So I remember like when my wife and I started dating, I was listening to Yanni, and I was like, a 19-year-old kid. And so now I've gone through all sorts of different phases of weird music that I like.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you're a dad, specifically that you're a dad nerd. Does that mean that you like to tell dad jokes, or what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, I probably tell a lot of dad jokes and puns that no one else thinks are funny. But I also I just love being a dad. My son, he's actually behind me right now. He's home from college, and love being a dad. And sometimes you just kind of got to be a nerd when you're a dad.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And lastly, you are a MBTI nerd. That's that one test.
Yeah, Myers Briggs.
Myers-Briggs.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's basically corporate astrology. So you go talk to anybody who's actually like smart in organizational development or psychology, and they're gonna write off Myers Briggs as like not really meaning anything. But I love it, and
Yeah.
I started reading about it and love just like looking at the different types of personalities. And then when I meet someone, I try to actually go type them like, all right, are they introverted or extroverted? You know, are they feeling or thinking? And I try to go figure out what type they are. And it's fun to me, and I get it right sometimes I get it wrong, but I'm just a nerd about it.
Yeah. I those tests are interesting. I think the last one I took was called Strengths Finders. Yeah, and those are, I think I got like futuristic, analytical, learner, very typical Monica
Yeah,
stuff, right?
sure. I mean, it's
Yeah.
data people are going to fall in those buckets, but when I did the disc profile once, I thought that was neat. I just can't remember it. Like I can't memorize it. And I love that, with the MBTI, you get, 4 dimensions, and each one of them are binary. It's one or the other. And so all of a sudden there's 16 categories, and that's all my simple mind can handle. I'm trying to go figure out, what makes someone tick.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Any other fun facts you want to share?
Most nerds have seen. So I love music, and I love all sorts of crazy music. But like when it comes to movies, I'm a top 100 guy. Like my favorite movie ever is Gladiator. So I went and saw Gladiator 2 when it came out because it's just it's top 100 cheesy movies, and they were good. But I've never seen Star Wars, never seen Lord of the Rings. I'm just not that nerdy in that way. I'm nerdy in other ways.
I I've seen them, but only because of my husband. Otherwise, I
Okay.
don't think that I would have ever seen them either.
I mean, I did play video games, but I found that I never wanted to sit there and play video games by myself. I wanted to,
Mhm.
play with friends or do something like that. So, a
Yeah.
nerd in a lot of ways, but normally a nerd about things that I can eat.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Pizza.
Absolutely. So, something that I like to ask all my guests is around learning, specifically learning new things. And so, what is your approach when you are trying to learn new things? What are your go to resources?
So, and I'll just be broad, but I think it applies to data too. So first, I like to experiment. Like I had my team over for pizza in the summer, and I got my wood-fired oven out, and I tried all sorts of different pizza recipes. Um, and when I say recipes, I didn't like read a book about them. I just made them up. And
Mhm.
so I wanted to go make pickle pizza with a sourdough Detroit style deep dish crust. And I messed up the sourdough. I used too much of the sourdough starter, and the pizza tasted good, but like it didn't really rise.
Oh,
So it was terrible. But and I felt a little bad for one of the guys on my team, Jonah, who just kept trying to eat it because he felt bad for me. And at the end of the day, like I didn't really care. Like, yeah, it failed, but I learned a ton from it. So I think that's one thing, is finding places where you can just experiment and try something, see if it works. If it doesn't, cool. And there's a time and place to do that. I mean, I wouldn't do that if I was, serving pizza for like a wedding or something.
mm,
But I think being comfortable to experiment is one way I learn. Um, I also like to take things apart. Like I bought a motorcycle a long time ago and like took it apart to try to fix it, and I ended up selling it. And not joking, 20 years later when we moved, I was going through my garage cleaning out and I found parts from the motorcycle that I didn't realize I never put back in it after I sold it.
hmm.
So I think those are a couple good ways as it applies to data. You know, I've had the pleasure of working in a lot of different industries. In a consulting role, I focus a lot in healthcare now. So work with a lot of providers and hospitals and health insurance companies. But I've also worked with public sector and pasta sauce manufacturers and higher ed and like auto manufacturers. I've worked across a lot of different industries, and what I found is, a lot of people see they're different, and I find it's helpful for me to learn new things when I go find how they're similar. How is helping a hospital with their data, similar and relatable to helping a city? And if you look for patterns and similarities, it actually helps you take things that you've learned before and apply them to something you don't know. That,
Yeah,
for example, it could be like learning Power BI when you already know Tableau, or learning Tableau when you know Excel. Look for ways that they're similar.
absolutely. Absolutely. And being in a consulting role, I think, is maybe one of the best places for data people to start out, because you do get experience to all kinds of different projects. Would you
You really
agree?
do. You really do. I mean, I always say that, one day in consulting is like a week working in industry, because you get experience in so many different areas. And oftentimes, the projects you're working on are more complex projects that, that's the reason you were brought in. It's hard, and they didn't know how to do it. So you got to figure it out. And, that's fun, but it can also be stressful. But I think it's a great way to learn.
Absolutely. For folks that are trying to break into data, would you recommend they start off in consulting, or what recommendations do you have for them?
So I think starting in consulting is terrific, but you have to go into it with the right mindset, and you have to go into it knowing that consulting isn't for everyone. And that's not a bad thing. It's just not for everybody. And you can find balance in consulting. There's kind of a stereotype that consultants work 100 hours a week and work every night and every weekend. And, certainly some do. You don't have to do that to be successful. But there will be times where you just can't log off because it has to get done, because you've got a client who relies on you and is depending on you to come through. So I think getting started and breaking into data in consulting is a great way. And, I think that's a great place for people who, you've got some people who are really, really technical in data, and then some people who are like, Excel nerds. And what I find is people who are Excel nerds who really, really know the business, and maybe they aren't, a Python coding expert, but they know a lot of those other things. They know finance and accounting. There's a really big gap that where people can fill if you know the business side and you know the technical side of data.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And do you have any recommendations on how to kind of learn both as best as you can?
Yeah, so I think getting hands on and just doing actual work is helpful. So, everyone says, I learn by doing, and I don't learn by seeing. And that's true. Well, then you got to go do it. Taking courses, I think, is incredibly helpful, but it's like expecting. So I have a guitar on my wall, and it's like if you expect to learn how to play guitar by taking a 30-minute lesson a week, you're never going to do it. If you expect you're going to run a marathon by buying a pair of Sauconys, you're never going to make it. I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to enjoy it enough where you put in the time. And so quite honestly, I spent a lot of Saturdays not taking a Tableau course, but getting a data set and just slicing and dicing it in Tableau, or having a problem that I said I could solve and I had to figure it out. So I had to work late to figure it out. And that's what's worked well for me. But it's also helped me to find my ikigai. It's a Japanese concept of finding, what you love to do, what you're good at, what the world needs, and what you can get paid to do. And so when you can find that by putting in time and effort and experimenting and learning, it can be really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I know also a lot of people, they like to learn new things by reading books. So do you have any recommendations for the early data folks on which books would be really good for them?
You bet. And they're not data books. I mean, you can go get a
Okay.
bunch of data books, but read Smart Brevity. Not surprisingly, it's not a difficult or long read. But I find data people oftentimes, when they make a mistake, it's that they talk too much and they want to talk about all of the details about how they did something rather than just getting to the point. And I'm admittedly guilty of that, even at times, probably during our podcast here. But I think reading Smart Brevity, it actually changed a lot of things about how I think about communication. So I recommend that. I love Humanizing Data Strategy by Tenkai Fang. And then any of the Simon Sinek books. I mean, Start with Why, The Infinite Game. I mean, those are terrific books that are not data reads, but help you to think about how to solve problems, which is really what you're trying to do with data.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Are you reading any interesting books right now?
So I'm reading a couple. I'm reading the Data Warehouse Toolkit, which is by Ralph Kimball. It's the Bible for data warehousing. And so, in my point in my career, I'm not as hands-on in some of that, but I just wanted to get to read the fundamentals and kind of get back to that. So I'm reading that right now. And then I'm also reading The Compound Effect, which is, I heard it was a good book. So I started that this year. And it's basically about the fact that, look, you set a goal to run a marathon or do something big. You can't get there just in one step. You got to do lots of small, consistent actions in order to hit your goals.
Awesome. Well, you've shared so many great tips and tricks and nerdy fun bits. Do you have any other final words of encouragement or any recommendations for the listeners out there?
So don't worry about what others think about you. I mean, quite honestly, for a long time, that was just always on my mind, even if I didn't want to admit it, even admit it to myself. But you know what? Try something, see if it works. Don't be afraid of making a mistake. Don't worry about if someone else is going to think that your idea was a bad idea. I found that, I'm 44 now, and I've started a little thing where I set a goal, I make a plan, and have a system. And basically, where I go track everything that I want to accomplish in order to get to my goals on a daily basis. And I wish I would have started that younger. I wish at 20 years old, I would have set a goal for the year and broke it down into what I actually need to check the box on every day in order to achieve that goal. And I think for data people, especially if you start off in consulting, it's really, really hard, to find time to think because you're working and busy sometimes. And then when you're not, you're trying to get caught up on everything else at life. So that's what running has done for me. Every day I go take a run, and it's just a nice time for me to process a lot of information. It's a good time for me to just step back and think.
I like that. I think I'm going to try to do better at that for this year. It's one of my goals.
It's really, I mean, it's honestly been one of the most helpful things for me just to have an hour and a half where I'm not worried about anything. I'm just thinking, and all of a sudden that problem that I was trying to figure out a solution to, that data issue, all of a sudden it just pops in my head.
Well, Thank you so very much, Chris, for coming on the
Oh,
show.
of course. Of course. This is fun.
Yes. For any of the listeners out there, if they have any questions for you, where can they find and or follow you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, and that's it. I mean, I have a Facebook, but I don't really check it that often. So I hang out on LinkedIn, and I started just a few months ago, deciding I wanted to kind of invest some time in building my personal brand. And so I post every Friday. I post something called Fix It Friday, and it's just a 2-minute video with an idea that's on my mind. And then every once in a while, I'll go post a Step It Up Saturday or Celebrate It Sunday, because I like to use alliteration in days of the week. And then
Yes.
finally, I just have a little blog that I post on LinkedIn called Running Thoughts on Data. And it literally started just when I was running. I saw a couple things that made me think of a little trigger for data. And so I decided to write about it. But that's where you can find me. I hang out on LinkedIn a little bit.
I love it. Well, thank you so much again for coming on the
Yeah,
show. And
of course. Thank you for the invitation.
absolutely. And as always, folks, happy learning. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Data Podcast for Nerds. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you want to transition your career and become a data professional, follow me on LinkedIn for even more tips, tricks, and nerdy fun bits.